Okay, so for this week's lesson, I'm going to go through a certain kind of rhythm, which is a bit more obscure in terms of the sort of mainstream, more commercial side of New Orleans R&B, but it's very much associated with a certain social group in New Orleans called the Mardi Gras Indians. Now, the Mardi Gras Indians are the people who are largely responsible for creating the music around and performing the parades of Mardi Gras, their own tradition of festival, which happens every single year. This particular rhythm is actually really common across a lot of pop music, and you'll probably see it everywhere. But it doesn't originate from New Orleans, although a lot of it came through New Orleans in order to get there. It originates from Cuba, which, culturally speaking, especially in terms of its music, has a lot of similarities to New Orleans, as well as, having a certain degree of proximity. You can get the ferry on over any day that you like, definitely in history. So there's definitely a link in between New Orleans music and Cuban music. Many of them were the same musicians at certain points in time as well. But in Cuba, this rhythm is known as a tresillo. It's a three-part rhythm, tresillo, again, tres meaning three, which has quite a simple counting for it. It goes 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. When American musicians got their hands on that, they realized it fits very well over a 4/4 or more conventional 4-time American rhythms, the sort of thing which you get in a lot of pop music. And they found it worked really well. It added a lot of interest, potentially a slightly Latin feel. You hear it in earlier songs, such as The Crave from Jelly Roll Morton back in the 1920s, used a very similar style of rhythm, which later on was known as the habanera in Europe. But by certain points in the mid-20th century, the Mardi Gras Indians gained their own word for it, which is dispersed into New Orleans music as a whole. If you ask a New Orleans musician to play what's known as a Pocky way, P-O-C-K, way as in W-A-Y, or sometimes it's Pocky away with an A at the beginning, then they'll know what you mean. They'll know it's this kind of rhythm. So I'm going to call it a Pocky way in this context. If you want to do some listening in order to gain a bit more of an understanding as to how a Pocky way works, there's a whole bunch of different bands which used it. The foremost, one of the earliest practitioners in the New Orleans R&B world was a fellow called Professor Longhair, affectionately known as Fess. He's sort of like the godfather of New Orleans music. He's the sort of musician that never really managed to sell many records. It's quite obscure, in his day at least, but a lot of New Orleans musicians looked up to him and knew him well as being this sort of incredible stylistic innovator. Came up with a whole bunch of clever things, but a lot of his music was based around what was later known as the Pocky way rhythm. And then secondly, there's also a few Mardi Gras Indian groups, the crews, which have started bands. Some of the earlier examples are groups like the Wild Tchoupitoulas. Now, I'm not going to go through how to spell that. I might put it in the description. And the Wild Magnolias, who both extensively use the Pocky way rhythms. There's also more modern Mardi Gras Indian bands. Scout for them. It's a really good idea. Support that kind of music if you can. Now, how I'm actually going to show this off is going to be a little bit of a jump up from the previous lesson. For a start, I'm going to be playing in the key of F, because it's going to be very good to very early on get used to playing in different key centers. It's not a good thing to just have a limited number. It's really good to be able to switch on the fly depending on what the band needs. So it's a really good early habit. Now F is quite simple. A lot of the patterns are very similar to in C, but often, instead of playing all the white notes like you play in C ordinarily, you would play a B flat instead of a B. So the scale goes something like this. If you just want to see all the notes in front of you, obviously it's starting from the F instead of starting from the C. There's another key difference. So the key chords for that is F, B flat, it's a new chord, C, and yeah, those are the three chords. If you want to use the same voicings as you did last week, it would be something like this. Back to the F again. That's all the three chords you need to be able to do a blues. Now the bass line for this lesson is going to be very similar to the one which we used in the first lesson, stabbing those chords on the one note of every bar if you want, or doing whatever you think you're capable of. But instead of going like this, it goes something like this. So that's using that 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 rhythm, and you know, it's a really nice sort of slightly more cool version of some of the versions which you might get. You definitely hear it in a lot of old records, especially later on into the 60s and 70s. In particular, I actually originally got it from Matt Rebenak, and so I would recommend that you go through the same exercise as you did in the first week, but using this new bass line. Like that, and that's how you play the Pocky way. You can also play it in octaves if you want it a bit more powerful, like this. But that's a bit trickier. You also can miss out this top note, so you could play if it makes it a little bit easier, because sometimes navigating that can be a little bit of a stretch for some people, but that might make it a little more palatable to your fingers. But there's also, as with any of these things, I'm going to add a slightly more complicated version. One interesting thing you can do, and this is something Professor Longhair did a lot with his playing, is offset the right hand with the left hand rhythm. So you're playing the chord in between each of the bass notes. And it sounds quite cool. It's got a real pep to it, bit of a drive. It's a good dance rhythm, essentially. Little invention from Professor Longhair there, and it sounds great. And it'll help you trying to navigate slightly more complicated syncopated rhythms as well, because it's almost like playing a set of hand drums, you know what I mean? You sort of got offset rhythms going on and different beats and sort of tonalities in the left hand with all the different notes. I also put up a Patreon where I can post some of my ramblings about the different sources I find to work out how to do all of this kind of thing, and the kind of projects which I'm putting on. I'm planning on trying to put together a bit of a set list to be able to play at venues, and I might update you on how I'm planning that, recordings of me playing and practicing that, perhaps even involving, hopefully, me singing as well. But yeah, if you want to look at my huge list of resources which I've been putting together on New Orleans musical culture and New Orleans music playing, including a list of videos in which people are playing amazing piano and explaining how it works, then go ahead and look on there. I've kept it quite cheap because I'm just testing the waters. I have no idea about any of this Patreon stuff, but I'll be very grateful, and I hope I'll see you next time. I've been Felix Greenberg. Thank you very much.